Good morning. I'm Liska Turner from Beaumont People, and once again, I have the pleasure of hosting the CEO Leadership Series. Today, my guest is John Kelly, Group CEO of the National Heart Foundation of Australia. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Liska. Very pleased to be here.
Thank you. I love the fact that one of the upsides about COVID is that I can talk to people no matter where they are in the world, and you're in Canberra today, is that right?
Absolutely. And look, I think one of the positives with COVID is how I think people have become more accessible.
Yep.
Sometimes it used to take me a little bit more effort, particularly on the advocacy front, to be able to be face-to-face with people, but now I can get 20 minutes with them in their lounge room sort of thing.
It's amazing. I'm hosting a CEO roundtable today, and I have people that I've worked with previously from Darwin and Melbourne that could never come to these things because they were hosted over lunch in our boardroom. And so it's really, and people are available because they don't have to travel. You know, when your commute is 30 seconds, it's pretty awesome. So one of the things I think about a CEO is that you really are out at the front of your organisation. You're the most visible leader of the organisation. There's never one leader in an organisation, but you're the most visible. So what do you think are the most important decisions that you make in your role as CEO, John?
Look, I think it's really important to be very clear on the strategic directions. I think the older I get, the more I realise life is a lot simpler than...
Yes, I hear you. On the wrong side of 50, yes.
Yeah, we allow it to be, and we complicate it enormously. But I think we all sign up to some very, very clear and simple premises, but then we don't live it.
Yep.
So to come back to your question, I think a CEO and the leadership team and the organisation needs to be very clear on the strategic directions that you want the organisation to go.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have realistic, but at the same time stretch targets to aim for and measure. If you can't measure something, then you're not going to be able to determine whether you've been successful or not. I laugh at myself because when I reflect on all of these, they are simple, but they're so hard to implement.
Yep. And do you have a time frame? You know, when you talk about a strategic vision, are you talking 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or is it a bit of a mix?
Look, I've never, in more recent times, over certainly the last probably 10 years, gone beyond 3.
Yep.
I just think the time, or just the speed of change and innovation and technology, particularly digital platforms. If you go beyond that, it's sort of a work in progress that becomes a little bit unrealistic that you've got to continue to revisit in any event. So we've focused on 3 years for, say, the last 3 lots of 3 in terms of trienniums, but obviously then you get really down to earth with your operational plans at 12 months.
Yeah, when you cascade it down. So and this is interesting because I've heard different responses to this. So in light of COVID, has it impacted your strategic planning significantly?
Look, before I say that, there's 2 other components, I think, to your first question that are important because it's a bit like that Gestalt. You know, it's a jigsaw puzzle. And I think you've got to have clear targets, clear strategic directions, but also you've got to keep your team and stakeholders informed along the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get sick of hearing it from me, but that sounds so cliched, but that's where the obsession, I think, these things have to be obsessive in terms of your focus. And finally, you need to invest and listen to and empower the team to deliver. So for me, they're the 4 components that make up what leading from the front is all about, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, that use of the word, you've got to be obsessive about your strategic vision and clarity on where you're going in your team. And that's a little bit what Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great with his hedgehog principle. You've got to hone in on what your business is and have you got the right bums on the right seats to take you there, and you've got to learn what to say no to. So not dissimilar to what you're saying. So if we just circle back, did COVID impact your strategic planning process?
It didn't impact that. We were 2 years through a 3-year process. So
Yep.
The interesting thing is we've just done a whole 5-month process for the 21 to 23 train that actually was signed off just a week ago in its totality, and that was all done virtual.
So, you've got quite a large team of direct reports, which we were talking about offline. Has COVID impacted the way you, from a practical perspective, the way you lead your people?
Not really. In fact, it's changed the dynamic a little bit in the sense that, like we said earlier, you have access to people more easily and you can get more done perhaps in 10 minutes.
Yep.
So I probably speak to my direct reports a lot more, but in shorter periods and on targeted conversations, whether they're strategic or operational. So that's been a COVID change. The other change that's pretty obvious after you've got the benefit of 6 months reflection is it's a far more personal conversation with every member of the team, even when you've got 80 of them on a Zoom. You are relating one-on-one.
Yeah, and you're seeing each other in our homes as well. So immediately there's a different conversation before words been spoken. How do you, you've talked about your leadership team a couple of times. How do you build, this is a theme I'm exploring at the moment, how do you build team culture with your leadership team so that they see themselves as a team? So often when you talk to the executive and you say, how's your team going? They talk about the functional team that they manage as opposed to the leadership team that they're part of.
Look, I haven't found that an exceedingly difficult task in general terms, and in COVID times, in some respects, that's been easier for that reason of that personal component. I'll come back to that, but the challenge is for me not so much the work aspects of that discussion, but the merging of the private and the work lives.
Yeah,
that complicates how you then deal with that flexibility of the discussion with how people deliver and your expectations of deliverables, whether it's the executive team or the broader organisational outcomes, or outputs. The mental health component has been a significant issue coming out of COVID. And I think what you see is the pregnant pauses across the Zoom with staff who really don't have an economic base to live up with the Joneses, so to speak. So there might be my employee and their partner working from the dining room table, and they've got 2 kids for a couple of months homeschooling, part of COVID. Obviously, we push the workplace health and safety aspects, but that's another complication. Then you've just got IT. Everyone might have very basic equipment and basic connectivity that complicates all of the work private life, and nobody really took in the 6 months, in my experience, no one really talks about that, but it's out there happening. So that to me has been the complication. And coming back to your direct question about the leadership group, I haven't found any complexity in terms of how we work as a group on the organisational objectives, but we've had to do a lot more work about how to manage the team. We've far more time into talking about that because they're our front of house.
So what is it that you think that you've done well that's engendered this strong sense of team with your leadership team in particular?
I wouldn't be as generous as you, Liska, in giving that sort of credit. Look, I think there needs to be across the organisation a perception that you're seen as genuine, congruent and consistent. And you have to invest in the team. It can't be rhetoric. I think the staff see through that very quickly. It's not an easy, I'm not suggesting it's easy. You have to be a role model. So that all rolls off the tongue, but then I come back and say we're all humans. So we strive to do all that. But you know that there are lots of examples of where you don't even live up to your own expectations, not because you don't want to, but it's hard work and it's pretty lonely being a CEO, actually. So, but that genuineness and congruence and consistency and investment in listening to the team over time has huge payola.
And I think it's that you talk about that role modeling, because as you say, it's the role modeling when the actions start to match the words over an extended period of time. So then it creates an emotional safety and robustness to be able to have conversations that may be challenge or divergent thinking, that you can do that, because often it's the divergent thinking that strengthens a team. But you've got to feel safe to be able to do that. You know, I don't know about you and your business, but COVID's presented, you've already alluded to the economic, you know, like the homeschooling little ones and husband and wife working at the kitchen table, and there've been those sorts of challenges. Has COVID presented any silver linings for the business?
I think for me, it's the excitement of just watching people sort of step up and grow when you least expect it. So I think if you give them enough support and rope, they will respond. And sometimes that's difficult for we humans to just let go and accept that if we, most people are good, and we spend a little bit too much time looking at the glass half empty negativity side of things. But I think if you support people and give them enough rope, they will surprise you. And that's been probably a COVID light bulb for me.
No, that's really good. I think it's also the freedom, because the world was so uncertain. There's a bit of freedom to do things differently. I mean, I would never have done this if it wasn't for COVID. I always did these face-to-face in a way a bit more scripted, whereas now it's in my lounge room, we're having a conversation. To your point, we're humans talking to one another. It might go wrong, the internet connection might not work, and that's okay. We kind of just move through that. You've alluded to it in talking a lot about behaviour and role modelling and being the person out the front. That word culture, I've worked with many businesses where I've onboarded a CEO this year who has never met half their team. One person I placed was still working in New Zealand. How do you think culture is going to evolve? How do you build culture when we're all working in different places? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I'm less. I've always been a global citizen, so I'm not really all that fussed on where we are or how we communicate. It's the quality of the communication. I think cultural investment and behaviour change is really hard work, but it must be top of mind as certainly one of the significant, if not the most significant components of what I and the leadership team have to focus on. The old broken record again, but it's easy for leadership teams and CEOs to say all these rhetorical lines, but I'm looking for how do we actually find examples of where we're delivering on our rhetoric, if you like. So behaviour change is hard work, cultural investment is hard work, but we all nod and say, yep, they're important. Yeah. So for me, it's that consistency, congruency, communication, all those C's that the
And
staff over time have to sign off on that and say, yep, I get it. You mean it.
How do you practically, are there any examples maybe for an up-and-coming CEO or a CEO that's always had their staff in one place and they haven't had the opportunity to be a global citizen? Are there any practical examples that have really stood you in good stead to build culture, you know, when you're a lot more remote from your team than others are?
Look, I think they come back to some of those, again, simple but universal truths. And it's about trusting somebody. It's about me saying to you, Liska, whether you're in Nairobi or Glebe in Sydney, that I trust you in what you're going to do, and you will come and speak to me when you know you need to. And I mean, you don't have to sign off on that.
Because you took over at a juncture in the organisational history and journey of the Heart Foundation as well. So, you know, you haven't navigated necessarily the easiest of times, which is why I'm interested in your insights.
No, and it's still very tough work. Even 4.5 years later, I'm in constant dialogue with the board between risk management and conservatism versus innovation and agility. It's almost a non-stop dynamic process. But I think if you are a change agent, that's just part of the parcel. Some people, you know, there are different theories on change. Some people say, oh no, you need to get to a platform or a plateau and let people have a rest. Others say, no, keep going, keep going, keep going. So it's a matter of coming back to being clear on your strategy and being clear on what you're aiming for, being clear on I share a lot of my pains and joys with the staff. I'm a very personal CEO. So I'll tell them when I'm finding it really hard work, and I'll ask them to help me, basically.
And you know, you touched on change. One of the things around this leadership work that I've been doing, it's been this idea that change doesn't have to be shiny brand new toy. It can be the safety, to your point, to create spaces to have that conversation. Well, what if we did this? This is working well on my part of the business. Maybe you and I can talk offline and see what we can do in this part of the business. So success breeds success, but it's on an incremental basis. And then, as you say, when you look forward or look back over the 3 years, you go, wow, look, we have actually moved the dial when we stop and look. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, I think that's an extremely good example of the practical operationalising of decision making the way forward. For me, the underlying premise is not so much whether, Liska, you end up achieving your particular view or I do. It's the ability for you to trust me to say what you think and know that you get a hearing and you'll be respected, even if you don't, if your position doesn't come out or is achieved at the end of the day. To create a milieu and a culture over time where somebody can say, you know, John, I don't think you're leading us in the right direction, is incredibly powerful and respectful. Even if I look, I hear what you're saying, but I don't agree and I'm going to keep pushing.
Yeah, trust is a big one. You talked about boards. You said you're in constant dialogue with your board around risk, vision. What role do the boards, and you know, you hold directorships on a diverse range of boards and committees. So what role do boards have in shaping culture?
Look, they should have a significant role, and it should be one of their key tenets to their successful performance as a board. My experience is many boards are not in that space yet. Again, it's a bit of the rhetoric again. It'll come up in their report that they are, but they're not. They need to allocate time to understand what the team is doing. A challenge for me with boards is to continue to keep them out of the operational space and focused on governance, really. Again, that sounds cliched, but
no, well, there is a rhetoric, like you're not alone in thinking that.
No, it's not uncommon. If I could have more time with my board to have forward-looking blue sky discussions, and they want to have that, but then to try and get the balance between board committee reporting and some aspects of CEO reporting and some aspects of what is legitimate strategy discussions, to find time for that, it is a challenge. And a board and the chair, the board's leadership, must see that as a significant priority if they're going to remain in that space.
Yep, no, I don't think anyone, and blue sky thinking, sometimes in a way it feels like it's not achieving anything at the particular time, and it's creating the space to do that. And as you say, from sitting on board, sometimes you've got pressures in other parts of your life that don't create the space. But if you keep on having that conversation, I think that's an important learning. So moving on, we're talking about leadership yourself and above, but one of the key roles of a CEO is succession planning, to build stability and sustainability. How do you approach succession planning?
Look, I see performance reviewing as an ongoing dynamic process. So trying to move away from, say, once or twice a year, excuse me, of a formal review, and you may have to still do that.
Yeah.
But in terms of a monthly, say, just pick on a month,
a
monthly catch up with your key reports, it's a constant reforecasting, if you like, of what has been contracted as deliverables versus now what either can or can't be achieved and why, and a recalibration of that in terms of the overall deliverables. It's a conversation that becomes constructive rather than, is this a punitive process? And as part of that, I think in that probably once or twice a year more formal discussion, I'm constantly asking my team, where do they see their work life going, really? So the first thing is just letting them have that discussion. And I say, what opportunities, if anything, do we present to you? Because I'm very comfortable with investing in people and then they go and use all that knowledge somewhere else. That's just part of what we need and have to do. But if there's an opportunity within the Heart Foundation for a leader to move up, I'm as supportive as I can be on that.
So is it something that, because I see that your people and culture lead sits on your leadership team, which is fabulous. Is that something that you have so in addition to, do you think about, so you think about it in your monthly meetings, but do your staff below know that succession planning is valued and structured into their all the way down, like cascading down the organisation?
There's probably a yes and no for that one, Liska. It's we've managed to, this is quite simplistic, but currently out of, say, the 250 people we might have across the country, we've probably got, say, 50 people leaders with teams of 3 to 6, just to be simplistic.
Yep.
And our ultimate goal is to have the people leaders run the organisation, really. I just stay out of the way. And we're moving towards that significantly. So if I went down to the people leader and their work groups, that is more obvious than one would expect. Discussions of opportunities for them within the organisation, and where we need to understand what talent they have that we may not have been aware of. For example, recently, one of my staff who was, say, in area X, I found out in a previous role, they had a lot of involvement and understanding of social impact bonds. And that was part of just a project that we were looking at to see whether that was a potential income stream for us. Now, none of that expertise was relevant at interview for our Heart Foundation job. But knowing that and having at the people leader level that come up the line, that I've got a person in my team who has this experience, and in your report, you mentioned that this was an area we were looking at.
Mm.
I just thought I'd let you know about that.
Mm.
That's a positive. On the more formal succession planning part, it's probably still at the top half, the top tier.
Yep, fair enough.
Yep.
So moving the conversation away from the organisational to maybe a little bit more personal, what's your best habit?
Ooh, probably best habit for me, but some of my staff probably don't see it this way. Probably discipline.
Yep.
Discipline. And it's targeted towards deliverables.
Yep.
So whether that be communication, so it doesn't have to be a metric in terms of some sort of a quantitative outcome. The discipline could be towards the deliverable of communication. But obviously that's at an operational level. Say at a strategic level, it's the implementation of the strategy at the broad level. So it's the discipline in being able to continue to follow through, because we humans are not necessarily good at that.
Yep.
The number of times your listeners will probably laugh at this, but the number of times we circulate really good material to our colleagues and they love it, and it goes in their intro, and when you actually want to use it, no one can ever find it again.
Find it. It's true.
Then they want another scan of it, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
So I'm a big discipline and resubmit person.
No, good. Discipline. So you're a mentor with McCarthy Mentoring. Where do you draw your support and inspiration from as a leader?
Yes, look, I'm a big picture person, so most of my inspirational leaders for me are really the Gandhis and the Martin Luther Kings and the Kennedys and the Lincolns. And I have to ask myself, what is it about those people that I aspire or look up to? And it's the fact that they're all inspirational, they're values driven, and they're whole of community focused. On a more tangible level, people like Justice Kirby, who's been an informal mentor of mine over the years, Ida Buttrose, to me, they're more local Australian people that I see as mentors for me, and people that have had either challenges in their own professional lives that have enabled them to stand up and be very clear in their leadership.
Thank you. So you're a busy man, you have a big team, national footprint, and your big picture. In terms of, in this day, while we don't do the commute, there's so much information that's accessibly available. If you could help, so how do you curate what you listen to and what you read and what you consume, that both inspires you and also informs your thinking about how you lead your organisation? So are there any books, websites, publications, social media channels that you would recommend?
Look, the two that I've found extremely useful consistently over time are Harvard Business Review and their website. There's a plethora of material, and depending on your own interest, you can find out and carve out from there. The other one's McKinsey. These aren't exclusive, but they're the two that I probably use obsessively. I'm a bit OCD, so often I will then summarize those in dot points, which is a bit like the McKinsey model. The McKinsey model is often a 3-page with good dot points. And I'll circulate that to my 50 people leaders. So I'll have a people leader comms from me that is just ad hoc, and part of my discipline is then reading that and passing that on in a way that saves, hopefully, my team time. I mean, I've been a lawyer in a previous life, so I digest huge numbers of pages of material. Some of my staff can't do that as well, so I provide them with that. So they're two. The other thing, though, I think it's important for leaders to reflect on is to be balanced, and don't forget the arts. I spend quite a bit of time listening to music, reading poetry, and reading philosophy. And I don't want to overplay that. It always sounds a bit violinish, but
Well, my next question, if you hadn't said that, I was going to ask you, give us some insight into John, the person, the man that sits behind, and this is, you've just sort of opened the doorway very nicely into that, talking about music and poetry. And, it's that it harbours that opportunity for reflection, as you say, to lift ourselves outside our day-to-day world and be part of a much broader conversation. So living in Canberra, you're a regular visitor to the galleries?
I am. We're so indulgent and spoiled here.
I know. The portrait gallery would be probably my favourite. But just to finish off, what leadership decision are you most proud of?
Sorry, I'll interrupt.
Oh, yeah.
Straight after this, I'm off to a meeting at the War Memorial.
Oh, well, there you go. I haven't been. Yeah. It's been revamped, hasn't it?
It has been.
Yeah.
I'm on a committee. We're raising funds for a bust of a very important nurse that'll be in the courtyard. So anyway, that's a meeting in Canberra.
I'll have to. I was just looking at your involvement with nursing, and my son's just finished his HSC, and he's just been accepted into a diploma of nursing. So he's very excited. Yes, I know. So I'll have to tell him about that, about the nurse. So just to finish, the leadership decision you're most proud of, what would that be?
Look, I think when I was chair of the Australian Nursing, the Australian College of Nursing back in the 90s, we as an organisation, and me and my chair role, we led a process to have a memorial placed on Anzac Parade, that beautiful parade that goes from the War Memorial, looking right up towards Parliament, the new Parliament House. Across the lake. It's just a gorgeous street, Anzac Parade, and all along both sides are significant sculptures that reflect the Australian war effort from the Boer War onwards. And we managed to convince the government of the day to give us one of those plots for our service nurses.
Right.
So during my time as chair of the college, we met, and in fact, Ida Buttrose chaired the fundraising committee for that. And we raised $2.5 million from the public in about 18 months, and we built this most gorgeous just memorial for service nurses, reflecting, just the Australian community's appreciation for their work.
I'm going to have to go and Google that now and have a look.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's just a very classic glass art piece. Anyway, that was.
Okay.
I think that's one of my great successes in terms of leading a team across the country, because, raising $2.5 million from the community and from nurses, and pulling people together was great work and a good outcome.
Yeah, marvellous. Thank you for that. I love asking that question because I'm always surprised by the answer. So, and it's a question I always ask when I interview people, and it's the one that they never expect. And I just say, I said, it's the first one that comes to your mind. It's not the one you think that's the most important. So thank you very much for that. Do you have any final words of advice or encouragement to your peers, CEOs out there?
Look, be a bit brave. It's a tough life, and it is a challenge always in terms of the management board continuum. I spent more time on the board side than in management. But as a CEO leading a team, and particularly in the for-purpose space where, most boards are not paid, so they're jumping in and out of their commitment to the organisation. That's a challenge. So be brave and be open in your communication with your chair and with the board and with your leadership team, and share that with them. Just be honest and personal.
Just making a note of that. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Enjoy your visit up to the War Memorial after this, and thanks so much for your time. Cheers.
Lovely to meet you. Thanks, Liska.
My pleasure.
Take care.
Bye.